Welcome to the Dating After Divorce podcast. I'm your host, Shade Curry, and I believe every divorced woman deserves a romantic relationship where she feels safe, loved, and cherished. You can create the most amazing life after divorce, and I will teach you how. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Dating After Divorce podcast as part of the Remarriage Club series that I hope you all have been enjoying. I am interviewing another amazing lady who has been divorced and is now remarried and has an awesome story to tell you about exactly how she did it. So I have with me on Zoom Jennifer Major. And Jennifer is a holistic organizing coach. And I want to just turn it over to you, Jennifer, to introduce yourself to the listeners.
Thank you so much. It's such a delight to be here. I am, like she said, I am divorced. I've been divorced for, 12 or 13 years and remarried for 10 of those. And my dating story is a little different, for sure. Because I've known my husband for 25 years. So that changes the trajectory of things a little bit.
Yeah.
And I work with women every single day, and a lot of my clients are divorced, going through a divorce, having been divorced, and because there's a lot of transition that happens in that process. And so I've seen it from a lot of different angles, not just my own.
Mm-hmm.
And I work with primarily women business owners to really help you get your time, your space, and your energy back into alignment. Sometimes you don't even know what that even means anymore because you've been living somebody else's life, and really figure out how to do it for it to feel really good and to move your life and your business forward.
Right. That's awesome. That's amazing. Because I remember that place of right after my divorce of like completely not knowing who I was. Like, I was like, what? Being married was just such a core part of my identity.
Right.
At that time. And I think even in some ways, I'm still recreating my identity, and I'm
For
6
sure.
years plus out from the divorce.
For sure. I mean, even little things like, how do I like to decorate? Or how do things get organized? Or where do I put my slippers in the morning? You know, all those kinds of things were created under a different set of shared values that now don't exist in the same way, right? Whether you're single or you're in a relationship, it shifts. And so figuring out, and a lot of times I think a lot of us in those first marriages lose ourselves.
Completely.
Right.
Like it wasn't even shared values. Like
right.
We weren't thinking about, well, what do I want? And then what does he want? It was more like, what does he want? What do the kids want? What does everybody else want?
Right. Well, and at some point, what creates less friction?
Mm-hmm.
And that's not, like, we don't want to necessarily aim for less friction. I mean, like, nobody wants to invite conflict, but if you're aiming for less friction versus you having a fulfilled life, well,
yeah,
maybe there's an in-between, right?
Right. Like less friction isn't always a good thing. Peace at all costs isn't always a good thing. Sometimes you can go out of integrity in the process of trying to get peace at all costs.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you. I want to dive right into your story because it's really interesting. And I know from the notes that we shared in our prep call, you have and use this gift after your divorce to really create community and friendships for yourself. And I know that's a huge thing for a lot of divorced women. Many of us lose friends during the divorce or after the divorce or during the marriage. Depends on whether it was your ex that stole all your friends or chased all your friends away or all your friends left because you got divorced. So I know we're going to get to that part. I want to make sure I kind of plug that. Like we're going to talk about creating community. But let's start from the time you reconnected with your now husband after your divorce. And then you can kind of walk us back to when you first knew him, how you guys dated, the whole journey. Just tell us the story.
Oh, it's such a crazy story. So around the time that I guess when I first started really thinking, okay, like this marriage is not working. Like I felt like we had worked on it for a long time and it wasn't terrible, right? But it also wasn't good. It wasn't the example I wanted for our daughter. It wasn't fulfilling for either of us. And we were just two very different people, right? And we've since also agreed like that's like, that was probably not a good long-term solution, right? And so around that same time was when Facebook became available for the general population. And so I was reconnecting with a lot of old friends and that was a really fun experience when I felt really alone because my in-person community was one of like very hardcore dedication to marriage. And I felt very judged, even without them knowing that it was in my thoughts, right? I felt prejudged. And so I wasn't really open to many people about thinking about it, going through and doing it, that kind of thing. And so, so it was nice to sort of have these old friends who didn't know anybody in my current life necessarily, but really could just like jump in and like love me and like me for where I was, right? Many of us were going through divorce at the time, which was a little wild, right? And I think some of it was just that stage in our lives. We were, mid to late 30s. Many of us have been married for, 10 plus years, some less, some more. And I think many of us had kind of hit that wall. And so there was some community in that. There was a big hurricane around the same time and big life events, big natural disasters sometimes create, their impetus, right? They didn't make the divorce happen. They didn't make the marriage bad. They didn't, right?
But they put pressure on what was already, on the cracks that were already there.
Right, for sure. And so there were a lot that came from that too. And so in that process of reconnecting with all of these old friends, high school and college and old jobs and that kind of thing, because the only place before that really to stay connected was kind of sort of LinkedIn, but not even really. And so, so through that, I reconnected with several friends from this tech startup that I had worked with. And it was just like, it was that job that like changed my career. Right. And those became my family because we worked 90 hours a week. Those were my people. And reconnected with Greg in there, who's my now husband. And he was like my brother when we worked there together. And so I was just, we had kept in touch for a little while after and then fell out of touch. And I'd always wondered like, wonder what happened to him. I knew he was married. I knew he had a daughter, but that was all I knew. And so reconnected with him at the same time. He was going through a really hard time. He was going through a divorce as well and lots of other hard stuff. And he was in Minnesota. I was in Texas and just sort of walked through and supported each other through it because we had been such great friends before that when we reconnected, that just like that trust and understanding just came right back. Right.
Right.
In my head, there was nothing more.
Right. Because you said you weren't like ready to date. You weren't like, no. I want to get, what were your thoughts about dating again and getting remarried after your divorce? Do you wonder exactly how divorced women just like you are meeting eligible men who want a real relationship and a commitment? They're doing it by dating with their core values. Your core values are the GPS that lead you to the partner you've been looking for. When you use your core values on dating apps, text messages, and at social events, you will easily connect with your true match partner without chasing, settling, or wasting time with non-committal men. I have taught exactly how to do this in the 2-hour Core Values Dating Blueprint course available on my website, shadecurry.com/dating. That's SADECURRY.com/dating. You will learn exactly how to identify your core values and use them on your dating profile, how to ask the right questions via text, and how to tell the right stories on dates so that you attract the right people and repel those who aren't right for you. If you're ready to meet your true match, hop over to shadecurry.com/dating or click the link in the show notes. Now back to the episode.
I think I always knew that I would probably get remarried and that I would date again. The idea of online dating seemed really scary because that was the world I didn't know anything about, because that didn't exist when I dated before. And, and trying to figure out how to juggle that with a little one. And, my daughter at the time was like 2.5, 3. And so like, how do I juggle all of that and a business and, all the things. And so that just seemed super overwhelming. And so it was basically that whole like, okay, I'm just going to push that like way out. Like, yes, it's a possibility. Yes, it's something I'm going to do, but like, I'm not even going to think about that right now. There's too many other things to sort of figure out. And so I was not in a rush at all. And I felt really comfortable in my own skin. I felt really comfortable living on my own and doing that juggle. I had a great relationship, still do, with my daughter's dad. And so I knew that co-parenting relationship would be really solid. And so I wasn't.
And you said you had like all these friends. You were hanging out with like
happy hours. We would go to happy hours. We would get together for brunches. We were, so like I had friends to plug into, some that had been there the whole time and some that were newer.
Okay.
And the newer ones weren't necessarily new people. They were just, old connections newly rekindled. Right.
Yeah.
And so it was beautiful because I felt like I had this community where I could go and I could be without being judged, and I didn't have the pressure of dating, but I could still go and be social, and I still could get the heck out of my house. I could like step out of mom role and stop worrying about her and stop worrying about all those things. And I had done that even through my marriage. Like I had been pretty socially active. And so that wasn't a huge change. It was just a big change in terms of, okay, well, how do I schedule this? And how do I,
right.
It's a different coordination.
Do you see that like social connection as self-care? Like, I think there's an aspect of it that is like, self-care isn't just nails and massages.
No. And in fact, I would say that's, yes, while those things are self-care, that's not the stuff that necessarily fuels you or fills that bucket, right? Like to me, the massage fills that bucket if you see it as time for healing and renewal, right? If it's just about like working out your muscles, yeah, I mean, that's kind of self-care, right? It's better than nothing, right?
Yeah.
But it's truly about you taking time for yourself. And whether that's in 5-minute bits and I think especially when you're divorced and you're single, if you're a parent, it's really hard to figure that out.
Yeah.
And so I think having friends that can pull you out, that can, help you be social, that can, hey, let's take our kids and go to the park today and the kids can play and, we can catch up, and, kind of meet you where you are. And I absolutely think that's self-care.
Yeah. And it's so devastating when you're going through a divorce, which is like, feels like this huge death. And if you're in a divorce, this is just probably for the listeners who have gone through a divorce where they lost that whole huge community. Some people lose their whole churches, and it's like all of a sudden they find themselves like nothing. There's like this nothingness in there. And I just want to say, listen, if you're in that situation, make the effort to recreate it. Like recreate it for yourself, whether it's making new friends or finding new, whatever you need to do to have that human connection in your life is so important.
Oh, for sure. Well, and I think I've seen this with some friends where they make the assumption that their friends are going to side with their ex. And so they distance themselves from their friends because they make that assumption. And then their friends are thinking like, oh, well, she just doesn't want to have anything to do with me. So, okay.
Yeah. And although there are some friends who there are some friends who will side with your ex. I mean, that is
for sure.
That is a real thing. Yeah.
Oh, for sure. They're going to be friends that pick sides, right? One way or the other. And they're going to be friends who can be friends with both, and they're going to be friends who can't be friends with either. Right?
Yeah.
And all of those are okay. But to be really clear, I think with friends, because there were some that I assumed like, oh, they're going to be closer with him. Right. Yeah. And they're going to, as a default, not be close to me. And And it turned out that that wasn't true.
Mm.
Right? Those were assumptions I made. Like,
Right.
and they were able to juggle both sides. And it meant that, like, in that early stage, like, okay, right now I can't be friends with you because you are such good friends with him. But as I sort of heal and kind of recalibrate myself, then okay, now I can be friends again. And there may be different boundaries in those friendships, right?
That's a
But
good point.
that's
That
okay.
sometimes it's a journey. It's almost like you describe it like a journey. Like in the beginning, they were like all on his side, but then there was this journey where, as time went on and things kind of evened out, it became more of a shared friendship, I guess.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, and some of that's on me, right? And some of that's on them.
Yeah.
Right? And having the maturity to, like, be able to be around them and introduce them to my husband, and for them to get to know him as his own person, and that they're not measuring him against my ex, and that kind of thing.
I love that. Yeah. Because sometimes, and I think for me, that was kind of a thing, was like, I just thought everything that was happening at that moment during the divorce was permanent. Like, this is it. Right. We're drawing permanent lines, but it really isn't a permanent situation in many ways. Like, things kind of ebb and flow. And as you heal, you can change your mind about certain things.
For sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
For sure.
Thank you for sharing that. Okay. So back to the good stuff.
Yes. So through that process, I mean, he and I, like, became really close friends again, and really supporting each other through the muck, right? And he came down to visit myself, and I mean, and he's got lots of friends in the same town. And I mean, like, he stayed at our house with us. I mean, like,
so he used to live where you live. He used to live where you live, and he left the state. Okay.
Yeah. And so he came in town to visit people. He, a couple of the nights he stayed at our house, like, where my ex and I still were living together. And I mean, so, like, truly just like good friends, nothing more.
Yeah.
And then I started getting things kind of more planned out and in concrete of, okay, this is when I'm moving out, and this is, kind of how things are, because I was the one really driving that process. And when I decided I was going to move out, or sometime after that, I mean, I think it was actually after I had already moved out, he was like, so what would you think about dating? And I'm thinking he's talking about, like, general dating, right? Like, I'm like, I'm not really ready for it, right? Like, but, like, I'm not opposed to it. I'm just not ready for it. And he's like, no, goof, I don't mean in general. I mean me. And I was like, really? You? Like, he's still super offended by this. And I was like, why would I date you? Like,
oh my gosh.
Because in my head, he was like my brother. He was my best buddy. Like it had just never even occurred to me to look at him in that way.
And it's interesting how because there's a general woman thing about, well, he's just like a brother thing that we have. And then we go marry the bad boy on the motorcycle who then proceeds to make us miserable for 20 years.
Right.
Right. Like, so what was what do you think you had missed? And I know you were both married, so you weren't thinking about that, but, like, for your first response to have been like, why would I date you? Like, what was it about him that you had missed and that you hadn't seen, that you see now, obviously, that you've married him?
Right. I think some of it was what I was missing, and some of it was what he was not revealing yet. So I think it was both. Right.
Good point.
And so I think some of it was, how I designed what my person would look like. Right. And, like in my very, 25-year-old brain, right? Which was,
the worst brain for picking a spouse.
Right. And so, they need to dance. They need to like Mexican food. Like who cares? Right.
Right.
And so, I wasn't even at that place to even think about what those things were and make a new list. And so, and just the idea of doing a relationship so soon after, even though at some level, my marriage had been dead for a while, right?
Mm-hmm.
We were, he and I were really good, sort of partners in crime. We're a really good team.
Mm-hmm.
And with my ex and I, and we still are a really good team.
Yeah, so good co-parents.
Right, good co-parent. We can, we can tackle a party like nobody's business. You want to have a big event with your people, right? Like the PTA loved us.
Mm-hmm.
But, so from outward appearances, we appeared to sort of have it together, right? But that intimacy, that underlying stuff hadn't been there for a long time. And so I think emotionally, like I was hungry to be seen. I was hungry to be loved in that way that I wanted to be, that very romanticized, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't even know what that looked like.
Oh my goodness, that is so powerful. Yeah.
And so and I didn't know how to allow myself to go there, right? And so there were probably hints that I was just like, I had no idea, right? but I just, and he was very protective of that side.
Mm-hmm.
And because we were both going through our divorces and he didn't want to muddy the waters, and because it wasn't, I wasn't getting divorced because of him or anyone else, right?
Yeah.
And he wanted that to be very clear for himself, for me, for my daughter, for his daughter, right? I learned these things later, right?
Mm-hmm. So he had liked you for a long time.
Apparently so.
He'd been thinking about this.
Yeah, unbeknownst to me.
Yeah.
Unbeknownst to me. But seriously, he even had stayed at our home, right? Like, so clearly I didn't think anything was going on, because that would be weird, right?
Do you think there's a thing with women like yourself and myself where, because it sounds like you and your ex were like sort of like power couple, like very efficient, like getting things done, like where that 21, 25-year-old self of ours saw marriage as like this powerful thing we were building more so than this intimate, emotional like journey. And so we didn't look for that.
Yeah,
at that time.
I think that's very true. I do think that's very true, for sure.
Sounds similar. Like I have an episode, Why I Married My Ex, on this podcast that talks about there was just a little bit of ambition and things in my head, and he was the right image for that.
Right.
And there were things that were missing that I didn't even think were requirements.
Right. No, for sure. And, we discover that stuff sometimes, it's like, when you leave a job, like you didn't realize that there were things that you needed when you were looking for that job, that then all of a sudden, like you didn't get, and it hurt. And so it's like, well, crap, now that needs to be a requirement for my next job.
Yeah.
So I think it's the same thing. Like sometimes we don't even know what we need until we don't have it, and it hurts, and then we figure it out.
Right. So. And then with dating, just, and aside from listeners, when you're dating, it's not necessarily the first person or the second person or even the 10th person.
Right.
Each person along the journey helps you understand what you're really looking for, which is why it's so great not to make that commitment right away if you're not sure, because you can use every single person you meet as like data to know what you're truly looking for.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, and I really enjoyed dating before I met my first husband. And so I had a great time dating. I thought it was like the greatest thing ever. And I very much likened it to looking for a job, because it's, it is about numbers, and it's about figuring out what you like and what you don't like.
Yeah.
And the nuances of those things, and, gathering that data. And in round 2, the same applies.
So when Greg said, "Hey, how do you feel about dating me?" and you were like, "Oh, what's happening?" How did you go from there to sealing the deal?
Well, it was a little fussy, especially because he lived in Minnesota, I lived in Texas, right? And it was like, okay, well, let's just, and I didn't want to mess up the friendship, right? And so we had to make a pact that if any point that felt compromised, then that would be it, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I have thoughts about that. Not that you care, even because you hear it. No. You obviously did it right. I hear that quite a bit. Like, I don't want to mess up the friendship. And sometimes I hear ladies saying that and using that. In your case, you just had the conversation with the guy. You were like, "Hey, let's do this." and let's not let it get in the way of the friendship. Whereas I hear a lot of ladies say, well, I don't want to mess up the friendship, so I'm not going to date this amazing guy who's in my life.
Right. Yeah, we had to have some really intentional conversation around what that really looked like, because it was like, okay, this friendship part of our relationship is the most important thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I want that to be there regardless.
Right.
And some of that was because I was coming from a place of like no investment in a romantic relationship with him, right? Like it hadn't even been a thought. So I had no investment at all in it. And it was easier for me to be like, okay, we'll throw out the romantic relationship because it hadn't even started yet, right?
Yeah.
And I also wasn't sure that was going to exist in the way that I wanted, right? I didn't, because I'd never looked at him that way. And so that was a piece, like, who doesn't want to be in a romantic relationship where somebody just thinks you hung the moon, right?
Right.
But I had never actually considered, like, am I attracted to him? Right? Like, that's kind of part of the deal, right? Like, and is that part of it there? And what pieces of that puzzle do I need fulfilled in a future relationship, whether it's a short-term one or a long-term one? And, and if I'm going to be flying to Minnesota or he's going to be flying to Texas, and, he had already met my daughter. So like that whole like weird thing wasn't there. Right. But introducing that. And so it just, I had already met his daughter. Right. Yeah. But we met each other's kids as friends. And so then it was, there's a lot of factors in that when you're dating after a divorce.
Right. I love that you were willing to be brave and not have all the answers and experience the discomfort of having those conversations, of saying, well, it may not work out. I may find other things along the way. And like just that openness, I think one of the things I teach ladies in the Dating After Divorce Academy is like, you have to be willing to be in that middle ground where it's not a yes and it's not a no. And you're just giving that maybe a good chunk of time. Mm-hmm. And being willing to be in that discomfort of, I don't know yet. I'm checking it out. It might end up being a no. It might be a yes, but giving that limbo. A lot of our brains don't like the limbo. Our brains want it to be a yes or no.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I like to, much to this discomfort of a lot of people in my life, I like to live in the gray. A lot of my people like the black and the white, that very binary world. I love the gray. Because I can see like, okay, these are my yeses and these are my nos. And then this is the in between, right? And as long as the stuff that's really important to me is a yes or a no, then I can be okay with a lot of gray.
Yeah.
Right. And so that was a lot of it for me, is figuring out, like, I knew I was going to be, to say I was more picky the second time, I don't think is a fair statement. I think it's just that I had really refined what was important to me, because I'd learned, like, okay, what did I actually want that I wasn't even looking for the first time? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe he could have had that, maybe he didn't. Right. But some of that I didn't even know until after.
Yeah. There's a way that I teach my clients to look at it, is that, why do you want that thing? So some people write, and I want a guy who makes this much money. I'm like, why? You're not looking at the money. You're looking at what the money means.
Right.
And how else could that show up for you? So they might be like, I want a guy who earns, I don't know, $60K a year. Why? Oh, because it means he is passionate about his work and is a good worker, or whatever, is a person who has a work ethic, or someone who shows up for the people in his life. I'm like, well, there are other ways that those characteristics can display themselves without that actual dollar figure.
Right.
In a person, how else could this show up so that there's more of that gray, but then the core requirements are still there?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, and I mean, and it's one of those that, like, I can put words to it now that I'm well past it, but it's going back and truly looking at those, like you said, those core requirements, those values. What's that really important stuff that's going to give me my foundation and that's going to drive this?
Yeah.
And then it's easier to manage the other stuff. And there's going to be stuff that, like, I don't love that part about him, or,
There's always those. What are the things about Greg that are like your core? This is why I love this man.
Oh, that's a good question. He loves his girls. And bless him, he is surrounded by girls. Like we got a boy dog so that there was one more boy in the house. We've got 4 pets. 3 of them are girls. 2 daughters. Yeah, and me. So there's a lot of girls in his life. Yeah. But he loves his girls, and he loves experiencing life with each of us. He's a very experiential person.
Yeah.
And so
he engages, like he is engaged with the people in his life.
For sure. That. If there is something really tough going on, I know that he is my person. Right? Wow. Like emotionally, that he can physically be there. If there's something that needs to happen, like he's on it. And do we have time for a little story?
Oh, of course.
Okay.
Yes, we do.
This is when I knew, like, this might be my person. Okay. So it's a weird time to know that. So I moved into a townhouse, had taken my daughter to her Mother's Day out, came back, and I was on the phone with him, and I was on, Bluetooth headset, got out of the car, and I noticed that the door was a little bit ajar to my townhouse. But I had washing machine issues, or dishwasher issues. So I thought, well, maybe maintenance is there. But, like, could they close the door? I've got a cat. Like, really? So I'm, like, walking up towards the door, irritated that, like, they couldn't close the door all the way. And then I realized that, like, there's chunks of wood missing out of the door. And I'm like, holy crap, somebody broke in. And so as I'm going to shove the door open, right, there's fight, flight, or freeze, right? Most people are like, ooh, somebody broke in, I should leave. No, not this girl. And mind you, he's still on my ear, right? What I'm seeing is not necessarily coming out verbalized.
You're like, I got this.
And I'm like, oh, hell no. And so, like, I go to open the door, and there's somebody on the other side that's trying to keep it closed. And so I lost my mind, right? I was like, oh, hell no, you're not keeping me out of my house. And so I shut the door open. This poor kid, his eyes are like this big. There were 2 of them, and they were literally like, they thought they had all day because they were packing bags.
Wow. How old are these kids?
Early 20s.
Oh my
right?
gosh.
Old enough to know better. But like
they were
right?
cleaning out your house in the middle of the day.
Right. I mean, we're talking 9 a.m., right?
Huh.
And he's on the phone, and I literally, so it's like most townhouses, right, where it's long and skinny, right? And so there was a back door where I parked, and then there was a front door that went out to like the patio and kind of towards the street. So I, in my infinite reaction wisdom, I chewed their butts all the way through and basically walked them out of the house. There were a lot of cuss words, and they literally were so scared of me because, like, who does that, right? So, and the whole time he's still on my ear, literally saying nothing, right? Just listening. I forgot he's there, right? They get out. I see literally my whole life packed up.
Wow.
Like my work laptop, jewelry, everything at the bottom of the stairs. And I was like, holy. And he's like, what did this poor maintenance guy do? Because he's thinking it's still the maintenance guy with the dishwasher.
The maintenance guy. Oh my gosh.
Because I'm like, put down my laptop, get out, like all these things, right? And he's like, what did this poor maintenance guy do? And that's when, like, all of a sudden I like broke down, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, oh my God, these people broke in and they were packing up my life and blah, blah, blah. And he's like, take a deep breath, call the cops, and then call me back after. Okay. And so I did. I mean, I called the cops. They came over shortly thereafter. They were like, you know what? Here's the thing is that we're probably never going to find them. There's no, I mean, technically there's charges we could press because they broke in, right? But you've seen them. You now live in the safest place because they're going to tell everybody, don't go there because this crazy woman lives there. She'll chase you out, right? And, and then I called my ex and I was like, okay, I need her to stay with you tonight because I need to be able to get this place back together and the door is a mess and this, that, and the other, right? Like, so can you pick her up from school and all this? Had a friend come over and help me kind of like put things back together because people, I mean, they had rifled through my drawers. I mean, like everything was out of place, right? And then I get this call from Greg and he's like, so our friend is going to come over. He's going to bring some things to block the door. He's going to bring a little alarm thing and all these other things. And so that way that you're safe and I know you're safe. And I was like, huh? He's like, well, I can't be there. So I called this mutual friend of ours and he's going to come over and he's going to take care of this for me. I've already sent him the money. He's going to go buy the things. He's going to bring them over and he's going to get you set up.
Wow.
Oh.
Did you ever feel so well taken care of?
Right. And that I didn't even ask to be taken care of.
Yeah.
Right. And that it was like at such a core level. Right. Like it was my basic safety.
Yeah.
Right. And the safety for my daughter. And it was just like, oh, he might be my person. Like,
yeah.
Yeah. Like I could, cause I mean, like it's easy to get caught up in the feelings of the good stuff.
But what happens when life happens?
When it hits the fan, like you want to know, like that's when your person's going to be there for you and that it's not going to be too hard or it's not going to be too whatever. And even better that he could be there for me without having been asked to be there.
Right.
And how, like, because like, I hate that question. Like when I'm super stressed, like, well, let me know what I can do for you.
I know. It's like, by the time I think of what you can do for me, I will have gotten it done. So thank you.
Right. Right. So, that there were things that I didn't even know, security things I didn't even know existed that apparently I needed to have. And he just took care of it.
That's amazing.
So, yeah.
So that was the moment.
I mean, that's when that like really that light bulb of like, oh, like this might be like my for real long-term person. Right.
Yeah. So how long from when you started dating did you get married?
Little over a year and a half.
Year and a half. That seems to be the average. Well, I mean, I've interviewed some ladies who have been longer, but the average seems to be right around 18 months to 2 years from the beginning of the relationship to the commitment. How did you have to work through a lot in between in terms of just like, are we right for each other, or the logistics or things you had to integrate, or, once you knew, were you like, oh yeah, we're good?
Well, the first 6 months were brutal because we weren't living in the same state. But at the same time, it forced us to have a lot of conversation. Like we talked a lot. And so, especially because I had a little one, right? And so like she's in bed at 8. So like I've got time.
Yeah.
Right? And so we were able to talk through a lot of that kind of stuff. And we already knew each other. Like we knew each other at our base level beforehand. And so there wasn't that getting to know each other warm up, right? When we started dating, like we already really knew each other and we already had a certain level of intimacy established and trust.
Yeah.
And so, but those first 6 months were really hard because we were living in different places. We invested a lot in each other in conversation.
Okay.
And we would both go buy the same book and read the same book, or we both like, get the same, like, note cards of like fun things to do for couples or that kind of thing, just to kind of, a lot of those kind of exploration kind of things.
Yeah.
And because like when you're in front of each other, it's easier to sort of have that more natural conversation. And online wasn't near as easy as it is now.
And it's interesting, even when you're with each other, I don't know that it's necessarily easier, because I think either way, opening yourself up to someone else, either to tell them the hard thing or to ask them the hard thing or be in the hard conversation, I think it's a challenge because
Sure.
I have clients who are dating in person and it's still the same work that they have to do. My husband and I, even though we've been married over 2 years now, we still do that. We buy cards, conversation cards, and we will read books together or read books and talk about them. Like that work is just always needing to be done.
It is. And I think it's easy, like, especially as you go through the process of like just being married in life and that kind of thing, it's easy to get away from that. And and it's always a good idea to, let me resurface some of that old stuff. Or, I mean, like love languages is built into our family dynamic. I mean, like we all do the quiz every single year, and we
It
like even have
changes
like a little chart.
sometimes. Yeah.
It does shift, yeah. And especially with our girls, right? I mean, like, a 5-year-old is very different than a 16-year-old. Right?
Right.
Gifts were top of the list for a long time.
Yeah.
So knowing how to not just interact with each other, but also with our girls. And, and then when the oldest moved out, and then that changed the family dynamics, because now we're a house of 3 rather than 2 or 4. And so,
yeah. So what is your, like, if you want to give the listeners like just one piece of advice around, dating, what would your one piece of advice be?
I would say be comfortable in your own skin first. Like,
That's
be
so
comfortable being by yourself, entertaining yourself, going out to eat by yourself, because then anybody else who comes into your circle is just going to add another layer for you. They're not there to fill something.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it's so easy to get into bad relationships, is when you're looking for that other puzzle piece.
Right.
And
right, I agree with that. I think it's so hard to quantify. I think for a lot of people, quantifying what does it look like to be comfortable with myself, and relationships. This is one of my challenges as a dating coach, is that you say one statement to one person, it means one thing. To another person, it means something entirely different. Right. Some people are like, oh, I'm totally comfortable with myself. I'm totally comfortable being alone. But what they've done is they've filled their life with work. So they think they're comfortable being alone, but they're using work to cover up the fact that they're not comfortable being alone. And then they still fall into those situations. Like when you're comfortable in your skin, what does that feel like to you?
To me, that feels like I know what the heck I value, right? I'm comfortable saying no to people and activities. I'm comfortable saying yes to certain things or going out and seeking those. If I'm really in the mood for Mexican and I don't have friends around, well, I'm just going to go out and give me some Mexican food, right? Like,
oh, I love that.
Because I think like going to a movie by yourself, going out to dinner by yourself, those to me are really good tests for that. Because it can be really weird if you've never done it before.
Yeah.
And not like, well, I eat by myself at lunch all the time, like at work. Well, that's not the same.
It's not the same.
Take yourself out to a nice dinner, like go to a fancy restaurant by yourself. Order a glass of wine, have a beautiful dinner, enjoy the experience, and enjoy your own company.
Oh my gosh, so good. Like you're alone, you're caring for your own needs in a way that you might want someone else to do it, but you're comfortable doing it for yourself. And you're comfortable being seen doing it for yourself. Like you're not making yourself a nice dinner at home and then watching Netflix. You're like going out and you're going to be at that restaurant by yourself, thinking about the fact that people are looking at me being by myself. I used to I would just take a book. I would take a book. I would go to the restaurant that had, because I'm a little bit of a foodie. And I would just sit at the table enjoying whatever amazing meal it was with my book. And just I literally didn't care what people thought.
Well, and if you need socialization and you don't have friends that are interested in being social that night, or it doesn't work for their schedule, go find a beautiful bar and sit at the bar. Bartenders have the gift of gab, right? And you can create that socialization for yourself. Go go to a museum, go to a church thing, go to, right? Like there's lots of places to find that to where you create that for yourself. And then somebody else coming in also isn't going to feel the pressure of like, dude, this person like really needs to be social. And now that's all on me. Like,
yes. Yeah. It's not like you're starving for like air. And then this person comes in and they're like the air that you breathe.
Right. Right. And not to go too far, like you said, like the people with work and that kind of thing, to where like somebody else coming in now, there's no room for them.
Yes.
Or something else has to suffer because they've come in and you want to make time for them. And so just figuring out where that balance is and what's really important.
I love that. That's so good, because that's such a personal but useful test. Like only the individual can say when they're there. And because people, of course, love to give us advice about who we are and relationships, this is something that every woman listening can say, oh, this is what it feels like inside of me to be well taken care of by myself. And that's how I know that I'm okay. And I don't have to, wait for someone else to tell me, or wait for someone else to come and fill that hole. That's beautiful advice.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for your time today, Jennifer. I love your story. I love that you have this, just beautiful energy that is so attractive and so warm. And I can see how you created all of that community and attracted Greg. Tell the listeners again where they can find you, what you do again, where they can find you, spell out like maybe some of your social media handles so they can connect with you easily.
Awesome. So I am a holistic organization and productivity specialist. And so what that really means is that I help women business owners to get their space, their schedule, and their spirit back into alignment. When they have lost themselves, it all feels like too much, because I truly believe that we all deserve clutter-free spaces and to have more time for naps and money.
Amen to naps and money.
Right. And so you can find me. The easiest way is to go to my website. It's cultivating-you.com. And on the links page, you can find all my links for social media and some of my favorite topics on there. And I would love to connect with anyone. I've got a free Facebook group where people can come in and get that kind of support all the time, as well as a beautiful membership where you're more nurtured and coached and given skills, because we don't come out of the womb with these skills, though we think we do, right? There's this, the patriarchal BS, right? That like as women, you should be good at time management and organizing and household management and blah, blah, blah.
So that we don't have to do it.
Right? It's all BS. Right. It's all BS, right?
So good.
A, we're not supposed to come out good at it. And B, we're not supposed to necessarily do it all, right?
Right.
But regardless, being skilled at organizing, being skilled at your time management is beneficial for you, for your family, for your household, for your business, for your work, for everything. And so coming into a space where you can grow those skills, you can get more comfortable with it and get more comfortable with figuring out how to delegate and educate out so that it's not all on you.
So good. All right, everyone, you have heard from Jennifer Major today. Reach out to her, visit her website, cultivating-you.com, follow her on social media. And I hope you've enjoyed this conversation just about what it really looks like to create this a whole new relationship, right? And to do it in a way that has you exploring who you are and what you really want, not so much just like grabbing random tips from everywhere and trying to put it together, but really building a relationship in a way that takes into consideration who you really are, what you want out of the relationship, and has you showing up as the real you. So I think those are some of the things that I took away from today's conversation. Jennifer, thank you again for your time.
My pleasure.
And for everyone listening, thank you for your time and attention. And I will talk to you next time. Thanks for listening today. If you are ready to get married after divorce, I want to invite you to download my free 8-video training specifically designed to help divorced women date with ease and get married again. head over to sadecurry.com to get started. That's SADECURRY.com. I'll see you inside.